Hello, welcome to Falcon Blues TV, and I've got a very special guest this evening. This is Chris Evans, author of Gary Lineker, A Portrait of a Football Icon. The book is available now to buy. It's been out since January the 13th, I believe, Chris. But thank you for joining us at Falcon Blues TV. And, first and foremost, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me on. So I'm a journalist, a football journalist, doing this for a number of years now, longer than I like to think. I'm predominantly freelance, but I do a lot with 442. I've been writing for them for over 10 years. I do stuff like BBC Sport, things like The Guardian, all sorts of different bits and pieces over the years. I've also done a few different books. This is my third one. The one that most people may have come across before, How to Win the World Cup, I did with Bloomsbury around the last World Cup. That was around like international managers. And then this year is the second one that I've done with Bloomsbury. That's this Gary Lineker biography.
What gave you the interest and the what swayed you towards wanting to write something about Gary Lineker?
There's two things really. So I live in Leicestershire. My dad's a Leicester fan, and he's kind of like the right sort of age to have been down at Filbert Street at that time. So, but also kind of being in the area, everyone's always got a Lineker story. So whether it's kind of going down and shopping at Gary's dad's stall, like the market stall in the city centre, or whether it's playing football or cricket or anything, a variety, going to school with either Gary or Wayne, people will always tell you they know them. And so many people tell you that they played against Gary as well. Even people who weren't in his age group will tell you they played against him and won. Which I tell you what, I think some of them must be telling a few fibs. Everyone's got a story, and I think for me, so I'm 37, and I think I was so aware of him, and Gary Lineker has been such a key figure throughout my football life, I suppose. But so much of it, either his story you don't know because people are too young to remember, or actually because so much, and he's so relevant, he's done so much in that time, people have forgotten. So it's kind of reminding them of that as well. So it's kind of looking back and looking at actually the makings of the man and what he is today.
I say, because you look at it and you go, well, he's just a fella off Match of the Day, but he was so much more, a footballing legend, really, goal scoring legend. Not just for Everton in Everton's case, which is what we're here to talk about, but for Leicester City, for Tottenham, Barcelona, and then even moving into like the likes of Grampus 8 and coming back to the UK. But as England stature, he's still one of the highest goal scorers in English history. He's that. And that relevance is always there. You look at the World Cup '90, and he was predominant. You saw all the things. He was always involved in everything. There was just like you say, a football icon, and one that should be held in high accolades with a lot of Premier League players as well.
Yeah, I think it's to his credit actually, and show what he's kind of done and he's tried to achieve. That actually, you look back now and people don't discuss him as England international Gary Lineker. They use so many different adjectives that describe what he is and everything that he's done. And obviously, I think that's going to continue over the years as well, even after Match of the Day is finished. He's got no sign of stopping. I remember there was an interview with Jude Bellingham during the 2022 World Cup, and they asked him and said, "Oh, what do you know about Gary Lineker?" And obviously, Jude Bellingham, a teenager at the time, and he says, "Oh, well, he's the guy off Match of the Day." Yeah. And he said, "Oh yeah, my dad told me a little bit about him, and it was something like, he was very good at hanging around the goals and getting in there." So, it's interesting because I think there is a whole raft of people who perhaps don't know the story. And actually, it's quite an interesting story because he went from kind of being quite an unfancied player. It wasn't like it is now. Like, no one had kind of marks Gary Lineker out as the star at Leicester, let alone kind of like a future England captain. So his progress is quite incredible, really, and there's quite a good story in that regard too.
So where does it stem from then? Because obviously I want to talk about moving on to Everton and then the season of 40 goals in 57 games. But where did it start for Gary?
Well, it started all, I suppose. Everyone always say about the market store, but I don't think he didn't like it there, and I think that kind of encouraged him to kind of get into sport. I think while Wayne kind of was a little bit kind of more your man on the market, I think Gary was a little bit quieter, and I think he would always kind of want to go out and play sport and I think Wayne was the same, but I think Gary kind of had something a little bit extra, that he was kind of dedicated to that cause. And I think he could have probably been a professional cricketer from everyone I've spoken to and what we've seen. I mean, he scored a lot of runs, as did Wayne, actually, for Leicestershire at the youth level. But obviously football was what he wanted to do. He signed as part of a group of players for Leicester while they were down towards the bottom of the second division. And he wasn't the standout player. He wasn't even the standout young striker at the time. There's a guy called Dave Buchanan who seemed to be the one that everyone was talking about. But Gary had an intelligence, and he had kind of like a desire inside that he wanted to achieve something. And he went away and he learned his craft. He understood what he was good at. He understood what he wasn't quite so good at. And he made sure that what he excelled in, he was really, really good. And it was that kind of got him eventually, after years, to break in as a Leicester regular. And then obviously top scoring, first division 2 years in a row, led to the move to Everton. But yeah, certainly it wasn't handed to him on a plate.
I mean, it just scored an immeasurable amount of goals. What was it? Was it something like 80-something goals in the 3 seasons that he had at Leicester, which included one season in the second division as well? Yeah.
So he'd kind of been in and out, and I think when he made his debut, he'd started out on the wing as well. Because I think a few people, I mean, he says he was he was small, certainly by footballer standards, and he was stuck out on the wing, and that never really suited him. And he was again when he was in Barcelona, and again never really suited him. So it took him a little bit of time to actually get his opportunity, and I think he had a bit of luck getting in. But once he got his opportunity and he was scoring regularly, there was no looking back. I think there was an injury that he actually got, what got his first regular run in the team as a striker, and all of a sudden, when that guy came back, I think Alan Young, that was it for him. You were suddenly, who's going to play next to Gary Lineker? Not is Gary Lineker to be in the team? And I think, it was a craft almost, and all his goals seemed to be the same. And you talk to all the people back then, you look at England's goals that regularly are shown, and they all seem to be the same sort of goal. And actually, that was always the story, even as a kid. He scored a lot where there were rebounds, or he kind of read where the ball was going to drop, and he was just in the right place. And that was a knack he had as a teenager, and it suddenly became something he could do in the second division, then in the first division, and off he went, and then internationally. So yeah, it was quite incredible, really.
Mm-hmm. So what led to the move from Leicester City to Everton? Was it a case of we can't afford to keep him, he needs to go on, other clubs are going to come shouting for him, and he needs to make that move? Were Leicester reluctant to let Lineker go?
Well, I think, goal scorer like that, of course you want to keep Gary Lineker. And I think Gary, I mean, for him, it was a bit of a heart versus head situation, because his heart was with Leicester. He used to go, his granddad was a Leicester fan, his dad was a Leicester fan. They used to go and watch Filbert Street. They used to go away. They'd watched cup finals that Leicester had been to. So Leicester was in his blood, and he still lived at home with his parents, and he was very much a Leicester boy. But I think there was a feeling, he'd made his England debut, but he realised that if he wanted to really achieve what he wanted to as a footballer, he probably wasn't going to do that at Leicester. I mean, the previous season, I think there'd been a choice. It was either, do you sell Gary Lineker or do you sell Kevin McDonald, who obviously went to Liverpool? And they said, look, we're going to sell Kev. And I spoke to Kev for the book, and he said, yeah, look, I think that was it. That they said, look, Gary's going to score all these goals, so you're the one who's going to go. And obviously he moved to Liverpool at the time. As much as you might not agree as an Everton show, like, I mean, it was a good move for Kev McDonald to go to, so it was hardly like he was scrounging around for that. But I think Gary, his contract was coming up, but the Bosman rule wasn't in place. But he'd kind of said he wanted to talk and hear if there was a bigger club than Leicester. Now, he'd kind of promised that if a club that he considered to be a similar sort of size came in for him, like Aston Villa did and Sheffield Wednesday, he'd have stayed put. And I think he was good to his word. But towards the end of that season, Everton suddenly kind of sniffed around a little bit. And as it kind of finished, even his last game at Filbert Street, there was no definitive, I'm going to leave here. Everton eventually kind of said, look, we think we want Gary to join. And it went to a tribunal, which was how it worked at the time. So it was a ludicrous situation where Gordon Milne, the Leicester manager, and Howard Kendall went to a tribunal down at Lancaster Gate, and Gary was there as well. And he sat there while they almost gave evidence. Gordon Milne about why Gary was so good and deserved his fee to be higher. And Howard Kendall almost talked him down and said, oh, Gary's not proven. He's never played for a top team. We're the champions. He might not work out for him. And Gary said in different times before, like, oh, well, why on earth have I made this decision? He was sitting there thinking, have I made the wrong decision? Because it sounds like Howard Kendall's not going to play me. Obviously, they came out, they settled on a fee, and Howard put his arm around him and said, actually, forget all that, son. I was just saying that to keep the price down. They took him off to a Chinese and they celebrated. So, by today's standards, it's ridiculous, but it's quite a nice little quirky point of how that move came about.
It just sums up Howard Kendall as a man as well. The fellow was brilliant for Everton as a whole, and just as an all-round person, how he was brilliant. But obviously the move to Everton, obviously Everton coming off the back of being league champions league champions and winning the Cup Winners' Cup. Obviously that was going to be a big draw for Gary, considering where we were going to be. Obviously, the issues with Heysel and things like that meant we weren't actually competing in Europe, but this was still an opportunity for Lineker to push on, but it didn't quite gel to begin with, did it? His first few games he didn't hit the ground running. His debut was against Leicester City away as well, wasn't it? So obviously that was that's like going back into work after you've just left and just all of a sudden you're working for this new company and going in for a meeting with the old company. It's just a bizarre little, just a bizarre the way the fixtures landed. Yeah,
I think he knew that was coming up as well. I think before the transfer had been completed, the fixtures had been released, so he kind of knew that was coming his way. And he actually, as the story goes, he actually went in at half-time to the wrong dressing room as well. I mean, he got into the home dressing room filled for so many years, kind of went in and realised himself. But yeah, look, I think Everton was obviously a massive draw, and there was so much attacking quality there. Like, it looked as though there'd be so many chances created for him. And I think Gordon Milne actually after that tribunal said, Gary scored, I think it was 23 goals for Leicester that season. He says he's going to go to Everton, he's going to score like 90, 100 goals because he's scoring stuff out of nothing for Leicester. And Everton were obviously so good. I think there was, you mentioned what it was like when he went there. Obviously, I think a few games without scoring, but there was added pressure because he was in there to replace Andy Gray.
Yeah.
And as a championship winning team, there's obviously a strong affinity there. But I mean, Andy Gray played such a key role in actually turning the 14th round before that as well. So for him to be told he's leaving quite abruptly, because I think he was actually moving house. And Howard Kendall kind of went round and he said, look, stop unpacking. You're off to the Villa. I spoke to Graham Sharp, actually, for the book. And he said the first call that Andy Gray made was to Graham Sharp and said, oh, look, Howard Kendall's been round. Can you meet at the pub? And he couldn't believe what had happened. He said, oh, Gary's coming in to replace me. But not only that, because they were different sort of players, it was a change of role. And I think
style and everything as well,
yeah, and I think this is it. I mean, to make such a significant change to a championship winning team was quite a bold move. And I think as much as it was on Gary, I think it was as much kind of the situation as a whole, and probably a little bit of concern because, I mean, Leicester beat Everton on that opening day. So all of a sudden you kind of think, hold on, is this the right thing to be done? And there was talk about, Everton fans were sending letters into the Echo. There was talk of some boos actually at one of his first home games.
Doesn't shock me that.
Yeah, because everyone, they loved Andy Gray and they didn't want the end of the good times, I suppose. So yeah, quite a weird situation really, because you'd think a young English striker would be, a huge deal to be kind of coming in, but it just wasn't perhaps the thing that everyone expected.
Yeah, it got to around his fifth game or something like that, wasn't it? I've got it written down here somewhere. Yeah, I'm gone. Where's it gone? You know what? I'm usually so prepared.
That's right.
Fifth game. There we go. And it was a 1-0 win over Spurs. And there's a bit of a funny story over that as well. We were just talking before we started this that no one actually saw that goal because of broadcasting rights. So even though we scored the goal in the August of '85, you didn't actually see that goal until around 1986 when they actually showed the goals on telly. But between like '85 and like the August and I don't know whether it was the Christmas or whatever, you didn't see that goal at all. And I actually had to go and find it online. And it was said, like when I was reading through, it was like, due to broadcast, this was never shown until 3 or 4 months later on. But once he hit that goal, he got into a stride. Then, didn't he? It was like, I think he scored like 6 goals in 3 games. There was a hat trick against Birmingham at Goodison, and there was another one, hat trick in the 4-1 win over Birmingham, and he scored 2 more against Sheffield Wednesday 4 days later. So 6 goals in 3 games. I think that just settled the nerves of Evertonians and just got, okay, the Andy Gray period might be over now. This might be, the Gary Lineker area, and this is what we need to be moving towards. The style of play is changing. The style of player that we're using Sharpie and Lineker up front now, but he still adds a solid players like, Gary Tricky Trev, and he had Kevin Sheedy on the left as well. There was always those options, and that's where the goals started flowing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird though. So, I mean, I think that it works both sides. I think the Evertonians perhaps kind of got a bit of faith in Lineker after he scored those goals. But also for Lineker, it's the first time he'd played outside of his hometown. He'd actually moved out of living with his family, which again is incredible. You think footballers now, you think a player coming in, what was he, 23? You think he'd be someone who was used to living away, but he was not. So it was a big move for him. So probably, great for him to settle his nerves too. But I do think actually before Christmas, I don't think he scored as much as there's goals against Birmingham, but he didn't score too many goals at Goodison as well. And I think that still meant there was still a little bit of uncertainty, despite the numbers he was getting. There were obviously a lot of players, a lot of fans who only went to home games. So they actually didn't see him score as many until after Christmas. And that's when it kind of started to kick on a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible that there's still some question marks over that season with Everton, even the fact that he scored 40 times, which is incredible. But then I suppose he scored 40 times, and it did some of the other players that you mentioned, Trevor Steven, Kevin Sheedy, they scored fewer goals themselves. So actually, I mean, today we're all used to everyone saying it's Moneyball, but actually, so Gary Lineker's numbers went up, but did the other numbers go down? I suppose
that's of other players, because I think Sharpie finished with 26, 22 that season. I think he scored like 62 goals between them that season. So Sharpie's goals just continued. But Derek Mountfield the season before scores 14. Sheedy scores 15, so does Trevor Stevens, scores about 15 as well. So I think that just goes to show what the goals, when goals aren't being shared around, then it is to the detriment of other players. You see that with a lot of clubs, where if a striker suddenly stops playing or is injured, no one else is scoring goals. You see that a lot in the Premier League now. Everton's a prime example of that. Where if you haven't got a striker, you need your team pulling around it. But when Gary's scoring that many goals, you probably almost think the pressure's off you a little bit and think, well, actually, I don't need to be, because my striker's up the other end. I've just got to give him the ball and he'll put it in the net. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, it's an interesting one, though, because there are times that, Oxford, you may well come to. Obviously, Oxford's the big night, wasn't it? When Everton were, needed a win to keep ahead of Liverpool, and they ended up losing down at Oxford, who'd had a horrible little run and were right near the bottom of the league. And Lineker didn't have his boots. I had
the lucky boots written down here as well.
Well, it's quite a famous story with it, really, because I think he'd obviously, again, so much differencer now that he played with one pair of boots and they'd been left at home, and he was a little bit out of sorts, borrowed some boots to play in, and he missed a lot of chances down at Oxford that night. And I guess to your point, that it finished, Everton scored 0 and Lineker missed a number of chances, which on another night, I mean, whether it's the boots or not, if he'd scored, that was it. But I suppose this is the point, that is so reliant on Gary. And I know he felt a little bit, responsible for that in a
Yeah.
really weird way, because the goal scorer scored 40 goals. That's your job, right? But then the one night that you don't, you still find that you feel responsible, but actually it's your goals who perhaps got you into that situation in the first place. But I guess that's just football, right?
Yeah, that's usually the places where you can pinpoint, like you say, in the Oxford game. And I know Everton will also look back at the game at Luton on the artificial pitches and stuff like that. That was a big game. That I think we lost 1-0 that game, and it was like that was another game. It's like, well, they're the games we should be winning. They're the games, and especially with Liverpool, we're creeping up behind us all the while. But because obviously we've gone on a run of 13 wins from 16, wasn't it? And Lineker had scored 15 goals during that period. So you're still thinking like, well, my job's done, but that just, like you say, that's exactly how football goes. But then obviously you look at the Oxford United game, and then you look further afield, Neville Southall dislocates his ankle playing for Wales. Peter Reid ends up on crutches. It was just a point where Everton seemed to just run out of steam that season. Obviously, we had the chasing pack for the league, and then we had the FA Cup against Liverpool as well, which is just another, almost like a game too far with that team and that Everton side. Losing players like we did, having Bobby Mims in goal in the cup final and things like that. Just, I mean, it's a weird one with Lineker, because Evertonians will always think it's an opportunity missed. And I don't know if you've ever spoken with Lineker, but how does he feel about this period at Everton? Because Evertonians will always go, we should have had that. We should have won the league that season. Lineker probably feels exactly the same way. Number of goals we'd scored and things like that. But it was just like, was it burnout from the previous season, the change in style, the whole issue with Heysel and things like that, and not being allowed to play in the European Cup? There's probably a number of factors in there that Evertonians will pinpoint, but I'm sure Lineker will probably go, well, it could be the one against Oxford, it could be the Luton game. It's just,
well, they didn't beat Leicester either, both times.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, that's not his fault, but the significance to him and Leicester is quite stark, right? So it kind of shows. So I think there was an element of feeling responsible for it. I mean, I did ask Neville Southall about this actually, and I mean, he obviously is quite a matter of fact chap at the best of times, and he kind of said, "Well, how can you put that on a guy who scored 40 goals for us?" And his view was that sometimes you can do whatever you want, and there's just times where it's just not for you.
It's not going to go for you. Yeah.
Time where the ball will bounce a bit funny, or it hit a post, or your stupid goal gets let in, and it's just one of those times you could try so hard, and it's just not your name. And obviously, I mean, I guess it was a lot worse that season because it was Liverpool who kind of stole in twice, wasn't it? But yeah, I think it's just one of those things. And I mean, so many times you look at football down the years, I mean, it's such tight margins, and we could be telling a completely different story, couldn't we, I suppose?
That's it. I mean, and like I say, I think Evertonians will actually, I think with Evertonians, they always think that Lineker doesn't talk enough about his time at Everton, probably because of how bittersweet it probably was in the end. But I think Evertonians would be a bit more interested to hear more. I know he's a Leicester lad, and he had his time at Spurs, at Barcelona, and things like that. But it always seems like it's that one season where it's like we could have had everything there, and to have someone who would have been the Golden Boot, the league, the FA Cup, that would have just been absolutely, I think Lineker would have talked about that for years. But I think Evertonians will always look at it and go, coming off the back of the league and the Cup Winners' Cup, could have just been more.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I spoke to a few different Everton fans, either whether they were in the book or just kind of as prep for this. And it depends a little bit on age, I think. So I spoke to one Everton fan who told me, Gary was his hero because as a kid, this was the year he was getting into it, and Lineker scoring all those goals. So it was his hero, and that's why he loved football. But then there are others, kind of the older ones, I guess, who were a little bit more aware of everything around them. I guess there's a little bit of one of the guys I spoke to in the book, he talks about actually it was a bit bittersweet because he went to the World Cup as an Everton player and didn't come back as an Everton player. And that, as well as the way that kind of there was quite an obvious flirting going on with Barcelona and Terry Venables in particular.
Yeah.
And I think that was, certainly at the time, people didn't really like that, and you can understand why Everton fans would feel that way, because that's their striker, that's their man, and they're powerless almost to do anything about it. And I think, look, I think he'd be viewed differently had one of those trophies dropped in. He scored in an FA Cup final. He scored away at Anfield. He scored 40 goals in the season. By today's standards, you'd be saying this guy's incredible, right? But it was just, it's through the context. Football's all about context, right? And it was just that sort of time. It perhaps didn't drop, and that's why it's kind of harmed his reputation a little bit. But I have come across this thing before where a lot of people say, Evertonians almost feel like he forgot that he was an Everton player.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true that is. You do hear him talk about a few bits, and I think on Match of the Day the other week he referenced that, and he was glad to see them doing well. But I suppose it is difficult because almost it's, for want of a better phrase, it's kind of like Everton's the lesser team within all of the rest of his career, and I suppose that's the hard thing to take, isn't it? Because that's your club and you love that club, right? So it's hard to see that perhaps you're getting pitched behind Leicester, Tottenham, and Barcelona.
That's it. And what you're saying there, just it rings so true. Even by today, like you're saying, the 40 goal season striker who wins the FA Cup or wins the league or whatever, it's £100 million striker these days, without a doubt. And then you mentioned that he went away with England and came back a different player, didn't come back an Everton player. Shades of Wayne Rooney. These players who were gifts for Everton. Just we had Wayne on a plate and he was ours. And he goes away and plays in the Euros as an absolute stormer. Comes back, it's like, don't want to play for Everton, want to go to Man United, they want to move on. And again, that's that bittersweet. We're losing another striker who's we want to put on this pedestal. Liverpool got Ian Rush for that period. We want Gary Lineker. We want Gary Lineker, the FA Cup winner. We want Gary Lineker, the league winner. That, and that's the. I think that's what hurts Evertonians most. And I agree what you're saying about being bittersweet. I think it was. I'm just reading through your book earlier as well. I think it was Graham Ennis, and he is one of the older statesmen. He's been around, he's been there and done it all. So it's a nice story for Gary, to say that, well, I scored all these goals and I was considered one of the world's best strikers, and that's great. But for Everton, there is that bittersweet time. But yeah.
I do think, look, there was obviously some unfinished business as well. He wanted to come back and win something in England after the Barcelona time. Although, there was an option, as the papers tell at the time, there was an option for him to go to Everton, and Everton looked into that, and he went to Tottenham because of the Venables link, I think.
Yeah.
So again, I suppose there's an element of that as well, because it's the jilted lover not once but twice almost. And then he went and won the cup with Spurs. So it's one of those. But I think history would look differently, and obviously all at this time there's the whole Heysel situation, and would the situation have been different for him had he been able to play in Europe with Everton? It might have been very different for him. Although I think he was quite a person who liked the idea of kind of travelling out and seeing something more. But I guess that was quite early in his life to be doing that. Say he'd only been in Liverpool, or I think he lived around Southport, where he was around there for about a year before moving. So, history may have been different. It's all ifs and buts, isn't it, I suppose? And he could well have stayed and had a successful career and been part of like an Everton dynasty, I suppose, winning all sorts of trophies, had history been a little bit different.
It's not, well, we can't change history, unfortunately, Chris. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Chris, it's been a pleasure just to hear a bit more about Gary's career, and hear a little bit more about because like I said, like you're in your 30s, I'm early 40s as well. And I wasn't really following Lineker. I was more that young kid as well. Lineker was scoring goals, and I was like, Gary Lineker's my hero. You know what I mean? As a youngster, it wasn't more like I've been there, done it, and I've seen us win the Cup Winners' Cup and things like that. I was still the pup, still following strikers, and just for any kind of player was if he scored goals, he was a hero sort of thing. But it's been really interesting to hear more about his career. But can you tell us more about where can we get the book online, or is it available in store, or?
Yeah, so published by Bloomsbury, so it's everywhere. I think so. Waterstones, W.H. Smith. If you're traveling around, I understand it's been a couple of people have said they've spotted it in airports as well, online. All your regular sort of places, it's available. So I guess the phrase is all good bookshops, isn't it?
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. Chris, if they want to follow you online or any of your socials, are you on Twitter and Facebook and?
Yeah, so I'm at Chris Evans Wright on Twitter.
Brilliant. Okay.
Right, so W-R-I-T-E.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Sounds okay. So we'll leave it at that then, Chris. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Hopefully, if you write the story about Everton and David Moyes, or the last 7 games, which has just been absolutely brilliant for Everton at the moment. If you feel like doing that, feel free to give us a shout.
I will do. I'm glad to see. Actually, I like David Moyes. I always felt David Moyes had a bit of a rough deal. So I'm quite glad that he's kind of gone in and proved what he's still got.
Yeah, it's a different David Moyes completely from the one that left 12 years ago to the one we've got now. You can see it. The difference is night and day, and hopefully Everton's progress up the league continues for the rest of the season. But for now, thank you very much, Chris. It's been brilliant just to hear your story and hear a little bit more about the book. As I said, it's available all good bookshops. Till then, up to fucking toffees. Colin Chong. See you in a bit.